How about that, right?
I would like to call to order the Tuesday, September 3rd, 2019 regular meeting of the Utility Service Board. First thing on the agenda is that we need to amend the agenda. We are adding H, Terminex contract under old business. Is that correct?
That's true.
I'm reading the notes properly.
No, it's under the consent. It's on the regular.
Okay, that's what I thought. It looked like a consent agenda thing, but it looks like it's
H.
right next to. All right, oh, got it. Okay, we're adding that to the consent agenda. That makes a lot more sense. Do I need to take a vote on that, Mr. Wheeler? All right. Next order of business is approval of the minutes of the previous meeting, which was August 19th. Are there any corrections to or additions to the meeting minutes? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion for approval.
So move.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Next up are the claims. These are our regular invoices for $413,645.61. Are there any questions on any of the claims? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion for approval.
So move.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carried. Next up are the utility bills for $21,014.63. Are there any questions on the utility bills? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion for approval.
So move.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Next are the wire transfers, fees, and payroll for August, $354,354.44. Are there any questions on the wire transfers? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion for approval.
So move.
Second?
Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Next are the customer refunds for $3,965.38. Are there any questions on the customer refunds? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion for approval.
So move.
Second?
Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Next up is Mr. Kelson with the approval of the consent agenda.
Good evening. We have 7 items on the consent agenda tonight.
8.
We had,
8.
oh, 8, H,
Because
that's
of
true.
H.
Sorry about that. We have the Reed and Sons for $18,075. That's change order number 1 to the Old State Road 37 water main replacement project. Second is Smith and Brehab and Associates for $24,400. That's green infrastructure stormwater improvements. Third one is Tulane Christensen for inspection of Monroe water treatment plant transfer pump number 2 motor for $1,742. Wessler Engineering for $20,500. This is related to Dillman Road wastewater treatment plant disinfection system improvements. Alton Witzig Engineering for $3,950. Evaluation of covered outdoor residual storage and loading facility at Monroe Water Treatment Plant. Item F, USA Technologies credit card processing for the South Bulk Water Station. And G is Terminix International, $10,000 for pest control at the Dillman Road wastewater treatment plant. And the last one was also to Terminix for pest control at Blucher Pool, right? And the number was $1,392.40. The approval of all these items is recommended by staff. Is there any member of the board who would like to consider any of these separately from the consent agenda? Hearing none, all the items remain on the consent agenda and will be approved by unanimous consent if nobody opposes it. Hearing no opposition, the consent agenda is approved.
Thank you. Next up is Phil Peden with the change order for Kreider and Kreider at the IU Hospital off-site sanitary sewer.
Good evening, Phil Peden with the Engineering Department for the offsite sewer that Julie just mentioned. This is for road repairs in the area near Cascades Park on State Road 37. The
The price is $88,417. It was originally more, but they credited, I guess it was originally $100,700, but they credited us an amount for what they damaged on this additional portion. So what we did was we went through, laid the sewer on one side of the road, and this is for the other side of the road. So they were already under contract to repair the portion that they damaged. The other side of the road is, if you look in paragraph 2 of the description that they provided on the second page, it was just a different mix of road sections over the years. Some parts are full of concrete, some parts are full of pavement, some parts are just different layers of asphalt. It was in poor condition. We felt it best and in our duty to repair that full section of road for the portion where we had the repairs. So this is to add the northbound lane to those repairs. So what I was referred to earlier, they did damage a little of the northbound lane, so they credited that off of the total price. Like
Are
that.
there any questions for Phil? Jason?
Yeah, so you said this is Old State Road 37 by Cascades?
Lower Cascades by the softball field. So this is just south of the stoplight of Business 37.
Okay, so how is IU Health impacting that?
This is, okay, so there's our interceptor sewer runs along there, the large diameter sewer, and the capacity to handle the new IU Health facility.
Okay.
That pipe was going to surcharge through our just our analysis, so it was required to be upsized.
Yeah, geographically, it didn't make sense to me,
Right,
but
that's a
now
good
it
question.
does.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Phil? All right, hearing none, I'd entertain a motion for approval.
Second?
Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you.
And after that, we have old business. Is there any old business from the board? Old business from staff?
None?
New business from the board? None? New business from staff?
None.
All right, so we're up to subcommittee reports. We have two requests for approval of resolutions.
Yeah. On the 26th, we met to go over the two resolutions before us tonight. I think we're going to have a presentation about that later. But the full finance subcommittee put forward a recommendation to the full board to approve these resolutions.
Okay, so Vic, you're presenting?
Yes.
All right.
This is ordinance 2019-9, I believe. This is the sewer rate review. I've got a brief presentation, and then our guests from Crow will be speaking as well. It's just a little bit of background. In order to reduce the amount of rate shocks for our customers, the council's asked CBU to bring rate cases for water and sewer on a regular schedule. And we have been intending to schedule our rate reviews with waterworks rate reviews during presidential election years, and sewer works and stormwater utility rate reviews every 4 years during the midterm election years. 2018, we did the stormwater utility rate review, but the sewer works review couldn't be completed in time, so we moved it to this year. USB members and council members have also recommended that we employ a cost of service approach to setting rates for the waterworks and sewer works, and we've done that with this sewer rate review. This rate review is a follow-on to the 2016 rate review when we did an overall increase of 22%. That was across the board for all of the sewer customers. That went into effect on the 1st of January 2017. Shortly after that review was completed, in fact within a few months, we received a warning letter from IDEM that said that our utilization at the Dillman Road had exceeded 90% of the rated capacity for 3 years, which placed us in a position where we needed to start taking action to plan for future growth and expansion of that plant. We reorganized the 2016 capital improvement plan to to account for this, and we've been developing a plan for modernization and capacity improvement at Dillman and also at Blucher Pool. There's also, those are the large driver of this, well, about half of this rate case is driven by that. The other half is simply inflation and the cost of operations and maintenance for the sewer works. Until now, CBU has not employed customer classes for sewer customers. All sewer customers were the same. State law allows municipal utilities to establish differing rates for sewer works customers based on whether their service location is inside the city or outside. This accounts for a couple of things. One is it accounts for differences in the number of customers that are served by a particular amount of our infrastructure. That is, if you have a lower population density, you carry more pipe and more pipe volume per customer than you would for the people outside than for the people inside. It also accounts for similar differences in the number of customers that are served by lift stations. And it accounts for the fact that city customers are, that the outside customers did not participate in the actual construction of the original facilities, that was mostly done by city customers. And moreover, city customers and the city general fund is responsible for taking on any debt should we default on debt. The city residents through their property taxes would be responsible for covering that, underwriting that. We asked Crow to analyze the difference in the cost of providing sewer services for customers inside and outside. As I mentioned, we have a capital improvement plan. I would like to ask Brad Schrader to come and comment on any of the details, or if you have any questions about the details, we can take questions about that either now or at the end. I'm sure you've had a chance to look it over. Basically, there's a lot of improvements that need to be happening at Dillman, and a lot of the modernization efforts are improvements in overall efficiency, particularly the blower project and the closed loop control of oxygen. Those are projects that have been in our capital improvement plan since the 2016 rate case, and we're ready to go to work on those. At Blucher Pool, there are improvements on the older aeration basins and to take on some other major capital improvements there.
Dick, just in general, since we're at 90% capacity, which of those phases is going to help us with increased capacity?
So basically, all of them assist with capacity. Most importantly are, and Brad, you can correct me if you like, or you can take this one. Yes, please.
I'm just assuming we're going to be building more basins or expanding basins. Is that incorrect?
Yeah, no, so for Dillman, we're able to expand the plant without a lot of extra basins. So if you look at this, we're adding a new filter. That's related to the capacity, but in the first phase, which is really 2019 and 2020, it's process improvements from which we get a little capacity out of, and it's really a lot of modernization and efficiency, which Vic talked about. And then a lot of the capacity is in the 22-23 phase, and that's where we really get into, adding more capacity to it. So all of it adds a little bit, but we're doing modernization and efficiency first, and then major capacity in the second phase.
So this is capacity more in the terms of how fast we can process it rather than how much of it flows in.
It's how much we can do. So right now the plant's rated for 15 MGD, and when we're done, we'll be hoping to be rated at 20 MGD is the plan.
Okay, just by speeding up the processes.
By more room and more efficiency and just different changes within the processes, we're able to get more out of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
On the collection system, there are a number of lift station projects throughout the system and improvements in our interceptors. As well, we are completing.
Terry wants to ask a question too. Sorry.
Yes.
I just wondered if the sheet before that, if there could be a total for the repairs needed at Dillman and at Blucher. It adds across but not down. Could that be modified so that we could see what the totals are?
It's on the next page.
It's on the next page.
By golly, it's on the next page.
Got it.
And we're in the midst of the, part of this, part of the capital expenditures on the wastewater side covers the wastewater utilities 60% share of the advanced metering project as well, and that's also in here. Yes?
Can I ask a question before we go too far? So the improvements at Dillman will increase our capacity from 15 MGD to 20. And that will mean that we're going to be below 90%, but what will that bring us down to?
It actually will get us closer to being at 20. There are some improvements that are needed for the digesters, but we have set those aside for this rate case because there's a discussion right now about whether to go with anaerobic or continue with aerobic digestion. So owing to that concern, we wanted to make sure we could get these projects done, and the next time around we'll do the digester improvements.
Okay.
And those digester improvements would be the last step in getting to 20 MGD.
Okay, and so 20 MGD, do we have a sense based on, I don't know, projected population growth in the city and such, you know, how long might this be sufficient?
Yeah, it's about based on historical growth in demand, it's around 20 years.
Okay, thank you.
So it'll be a while. Did you have a question? Oh, okay. Altogether, the overall amount of these extensions and replacement that have to be covered through the additional revenue is around $29 million. So now we'll ask Craig Lotz and Jennifer Wilson of Crow to talk about the financial analysis.
Good afternoon, I'm Craig Lotz, and my colleague Jennifer Wilson joins me. We prepared a rate and financing report for the sewage works, and I think you guys have all received an electronic copy of that. I think there are also hard copies over there. We're not going to go through that report in detail tonight, but rather a presentation of the highlights from that report. And if you have any questions, though, we'd be happy to answer those. To begin with what we look at, first of all, with the rate and financing report, just wanted to give a brief overview of the methodology. We start with a 3-year look back on financials. So for this case, we looked from 2016 to 2018 at the operating and maintenance expenses, changes in the balance sheet, how the sewage works is doing on required fund balances based on what is stipulated and provided for through the bond ordinances of the utility. After that analysis, we look towards the future of what would a next operating year look like, and we call that a test year. So we have the 2018 through back in 2016 as a reference, but we also work with the utility to develop expectations of what might be changing by way of operation and maintenance expenses, as Vic mentioned, the capital improvement plan and so forth. And we do that analysis to lead to what are the revenue requirements of the utility. So each year, the utility will have to pay operating and maintenance expenses. They have certain debt obligations that they're responsible for, as well as leases that have been entered into. And then there's the ongoing capital that they'll need to pay for with cash on hand. And so in total, we see those as the revenue requirements. And a big part of our analysis is developing what those revenue requirements are in order to determine where the utility's rates should be. For this report, as Vic already touched on, there's 2 key considerations. One is the capital improvement plan. The utility developed a 10-year plan. However, our report is only looking through funding through, I believe it's 2025. And that is where, when you get to the back part of the capital improvement plan, there's always, I think, uncertainty with time, particularly when it comes to financing. Keep in mind as you're considering these rates, that rates are only considering funding the plan through the end of 2023. Reason for that is that the current structure of the utility's outstanding debt is such that as you get into that 2023 and 2024 timeline, there's a drop-off in the debt of the utility as bonds reach final maturity. We think at that time it's going to be more appropriate to look at what are the revenue requirements of the utility then. With that, we would expect increased capacity with the roll-off of debt service, and we think that'd be a more appropriate time to consider capital improvement beyond 2023 for the latter years of the capital improvement plan. But certainly in the front part, that is a key consideration when considering what will the next year look like for the utility. And then the other component that Vic also mentioned was looking at the difference between an inside customer and an outside customer, and what are the costs of the utility to serve those two classes of customers. So that was a key consideration as we were moving through our analysis as well. To provide a brief overview of that 3-year look back that we conducted, I'll first do some highlights from the balance sheet. On the asset side, one thing to note is the buildup of cash that the utility has been able to do. In view of large improvements that have been necessary and planned for, the utility has built up a good cash balance that they're going to be able to contribute towards funding the capital improvement plan. So this report is contemplating $10.4 million of contributions toward that plan. And that's great because those are funds that you don't need to bond for or don't need to build into rates to collect for pay-as-you-go funding. On the line, also I already touched on this briefly before, but we took a look at the fund balances of the utility. That's the operation and maintenance fund, which is separately kept. Also the debt service reserve fund, which is stipulated in bond ordinances, and then also the bond and interest fund, the amount that's being built up each year to make the semi-annual debt payments of the utility. We take a look at those just to make sure everything is in order and all of those balances were funded at or above those required levels. On the liability side, again, I think the key thing to highlight, which I already alluded to briefly, is the roll-off of debt that's expected. So that chart on the screen is representing the annual debt service payments that are going to be required of the utility in the future years. So you see that right now, between the 2018 year and then through 2020, there's a high level of debt service and then a slight decline through 2024. But then you really start to see the dramatic declines after 2024. I mean, that's the visual representation of what I alluded to already of there's going to be final maturities of debt that will allow for more room potentially for those projects on the back end of the capital improvement plan. Moving on to the income statement, there's been relatively consistent for the past 3-year period that we looked at, 2016 through 2018. You'll note a jump in revenues between 2016 and 2017 related to the rate increase that took effect. So you'll see that revenues increasing commensurate with that rate increase. On the expense side, there's been relatively few changes over the time period. However, on the expense side is when we really start to look at for pro forma considerations of what will the next operating year look like and what information does the utility know of today that we can build into a future operating year. But on the look back, it has definitely been consistent. I'm transitioning into one of those key considerations of the cost of serving the inside and outside user. There's a lot of numbers on this page, so hopefully we can kind of break it down in a way of what our analysis was aiming to do. So when considering the utility and considering the costs of a utility, there are some costs that are going to be common to all customers. For example, at the treatment plant, everyone is sending flow, and that flow is going to hit one of the 2 treatment plants. And so treatment costs are common to all customers. In contrast to that, there are some costs specifically related to the collection system that are going to be unique to outside customers. The collection system is that infrastructure that retrieves flow and takes it to the plant. And some of that infrastructure is only serving specifically outside customers. So whereas a treatment cost would be common to every single customer of the utility, for that portion of the collection system located outside the city and only serving outside customers, that cost of maintaining and keeping that line in good shape is going to be specific to outside customers. So that approach of what costs are common to all and what costs are common to just outside customers is really driving this schedule. And so this schedule is summarizing what are those costs, and then how can we allocate those specifically to outside customers. The top portion of this chart is showing an allocation based upon the volume of pipe that is serving all customers and the volume of pipe that is serving exclusively outside customers. So volume obviously is taking into account both the length and the capacity of the pipe, the diameter. And we thought that was an important thing to incorporate, as the diameter of pipe is oftentimes driving a key driver to the cost of maintaining that pipe. So in working with the utilities GIS department, we're able to identify about 1.5 million cubic feet of pipe that are in service to all customers, both inside and outside. In contrast, there's just under 200,000 cubic feet of pipe that are in service to just outside customers, transporting their flow. I would note that that 200,000 number isn't representative of all pipe outside the city. For example, there are interceptors located outside the city. However, those are in service to all customers because those interceptors transport flow from inside the city to both plants, which are located outside city boundaries. So a small distinction there, but really trying to get at what is that portion of pipe serving exclusively outside customers. So you can see that in terms of an allocation, that comes to just under 12%. So 12% is our allocation, and we move on to the portions below, which are identifying those expenses related to the collection system. Again, as I mentioned earlier, treatment costs, whether you're inside or outside, isn't going to really differ because the treatment plant is fixed at one point. It's going to receive flow and it's going to treat it. There's not necessarily a characteristic when looking at your outside customers that are sending a flow of any high strength necessarily when compared to inside customers. So we really look and identify just those expenses related to the collection system. First comes depreciation, which is a great representation of the assets of the utility and how much those are depreciating or losing value each year. If you're losing value, you're in theory having to replenish that value, and the utility does that through extensions and replacements. Specific to the collection system, that is just under $1.4 million. And then there's a detail of where else, how else the utilities assets are being depreciated for treatment or for general capital. Moving down below, we summarize all those specific collection-related costs. The first line item is transmission and distribution expenses. These are expenses for the entire utility related to the collection system. Next are expenses associated with booster and lift stations. And then finally, bringing in that amount of depreciation expense specific to the collection system. So again, those are the costs for the total utility, and they total just under $3.5 million. To revisit the 12% allocation factor, or just under 12% for outside customers, if we apply that allocation factor to total collection expenses, it results in expense to outside customers of $410,000. And so that is the cost that is specifically allocated and associated with serving outside city customers.
So these are annual?
Yes, correct.
Based on what year?
Those are based on 2018 costs.
2018, are those likely to change over time, the depreciation?
Depreciation, it could change based upon utility adding in different elements and different equipment. However, a lot of the equipment that's being considered under the capital improvement plan is more on the treatment expense side. There's always going to be improvements to the collection system. However, looking at the bulk of the plan was more oriented toward treatment expenses.
So do you suggest this be looked at again in 2 years, 3 years to see if the increase of 12% is still applicable?
I think that could be a worthwhile exercise. I think we were confident in 2018 as a test year being representative of the different expense amounts. I think it would be difficult to say whether those would change in the future.
Thanks.
But were there significant changes in the operating and maintenance requirements of the utility, I think that would be appropriate to revisit that analysis. So moving on, we have the $410,000 specifically allocated to outside customers. Next begins trying to identify how that relates to the costs that are common to all customers. So this schedule is looking at that comparison of what costs, again, are common to all, both inside and outside customers, and how can those be expressed in terms of the amount of billed flow of the sewage works. So the top section of this chart is looking at those costs common to all. So we begin with the total operating expenses of the utility. We back out those expenses specifically related to outside customers. This is a historical analysis, so we're looking at what are the debt service requirements of the utility, but then also what are the lease payments that the utility has to make. Embedded in operating expenses, I'll note, is depreciation expense, so that is being incorporated as well. And just without considering pro forma changes, there's just under $20.5 million of costs that are common to all customers, both inside and outside. If we spread that over the base of all billed flow of the sewage works, that's just under 2.6, oh, forgive me, billion gallons. And that comes to a allocated cost of $7.97 per 1,000 gallons of billed flow. Again, that represents costs common to all customers. Next is trying to identify that per 1,000 gallon charge, or not charge rather, but cost allocation for outside customers. We began with that 410,000 that we identified on the previous slide, and we allocate that across a much smaller base, that base being the amount of usage that were billed specifically to outside customers. In view of them being responsible for those costs, we spread it over only that consumption associated with them. And that comes to 95 cents per 1,000 gallons. So when viewing the costs allocated to an outside customer, they pay the cost common to all customers of $7.97, and then you add in the 95 cents that are costs specific to them, and that results in a cost allocation of $8.92. In view of how that relates to costs common to all customers, we would divide $8.92 by the $7.97, and that results in a 12% surcharge, or what we're calling the outside surcharge factor. And that amount will get incorporated later in the report when considering the cost differential between serving inside and outside customers. Now, the outside surcharge factor is certainly something to consider when looking at a future test year. Assuming that is implemented, it would certainly have an effect on the revenues of the utility. So that is one adjustment we consider when looking at the pro forma operating year of a utility, is what does the next operating year look like? In this report, we adjust revenues of the utility to account for extra revenues associated with that surcharge. That, as well as some other bookkeeping entries, result in increases in revenue from 2018 to a future operating year, or pro forma year. We also look at expenses between 2018 and the pro forma year. One thing to consider is that in 2018, there was not the shared services contract with the city was not recorded, nor was pilot recorded as well. Those are expenses that, though not certain or fixed, we would expect to be carried forward in the future at some level. So estimating that level to incorporate into a future year of operations, and those adjustments were made. And that results in a pro forma expenses of $16.5 million. There are some other adjustments made in there as well for just normal changes in operating and maintenance expenses too. We could speak to those detailed adjustments, but this provides the high-level view of trying to get to what a future year of operations will look like. So that fulfills one section of the revenue requirements. Looking forward to the capital plan and funding that. I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, who will discuss more what those financing options look like.
Thank you, Greg. This depiction here is the capital improvement plan that you saw earlier, but now we've kind of showed it in pie graph form of how we're planning on funding those capital improvements. So the yellow spot there, that's the proposed 2020 bonds, and it's going to be paying for approximately $12 million worth of the capital improvement plan improvements. that would fund some projects in the year 2020 and 2021. We also are including a future bond issue to pay for some of those projects in the later years. And again, as Craig and as we've said, we are proposing what that debt's going to be at this point in time. We anticipate that you could do a rate analysis at that point in time, and with the roll-off of debt, you might be able to look at how you might be able to fund that without rate implications at that point in time. But you would need to do a rate study at that point in time to determine that. So, but we were proposing that in the future that you do a $19 million project cost to pay for those bonds or pay for those projects in those later years. As Craig mentioned, you have cash on hand that has been built up for these projects. So that's what the green represents, is $10.4 million worth of cash that's been built up that can be used for the projects. The red represents the automatic meter reading infrastructure of $4.1 million that was included in the capital improvement plan. And the large dark blue represents the pay-as-you-go funding. So that represents $29.4 million worth of project funding. That $29.4 million will flow, that revenue requirement will flow into the next page. Oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself. Wanted to show you here of the proposed 2020 bonds. The par amount that we're proposing is $13.2 million. And we've layered that on of the old debt, and we've layered the blue part is the new debt. And it's about $935,000 per year, and it's level debt service. So again, you can kind of see that it just is a layer that we're adding on to this. It's a 20-year bond that we're proposing with a estimated net interest cost of $3.24 million, a 3.24 interest rate.
Fixed on that?
Not fixed, that's just our estimated yield on that. So it would be increasing rates, so it would be lower rates in the beginning to higher rates at the end.
The rates would be fixed at the time that they would be sold?
Oh, sorry, yes.
That was my question.
Yes,
Bond
yeah.
interest, okay.
Yeah, sorry, it would be fixed at the time of sale. Thank you, Craig. Here is the total of the revenue requirements. Again, my eyesight is poor, I can barely read that, but from this distance. So the large blue purplish looking one is operation and maintenance expenses. So it accounts for $12 million worth of the revenue requirements. Taxes other than income taxes is the next, is the yellow line. It's about $680,000. The average annual debt service that we're proposing, that's starting in the year 2021 through 2024, because you have a little bit of a dip after that year. So we're using your pro forma after that reduction. So it's approximately $5 million. And then the lease obligations is just under $1 million. And extensions and replacements, which we went through on a previous page, is just a little bit over $4 million. So your total revenue requirements comes to $23,346,000. Your annual revenues currently are $22,700,000, so there's a deficit of $634,000. This results in a 3% across-the-board rate increase, and that'd be on all customers. So for the outside city customers, we're proposing the surcharge of 12%, and they would also get the 3% across-the-board rate increase. So their total rate increase on this, at this point in time, would be 15%, and the inside city customers' rate increase would be 3%. That is shown here. We've shown a snippet of the page that shows what usage is between 0 and 20. And so here's the inside city customers on the left, the outside city customers on the right. So a 3,000 gallon user would have an increase of 93 cents. Outside city user would see an increase of $4.79. The average user, I believe at the finance subcommittee, you asked how much do the residential use. The inside city customer average use is 3,300, and the outside city customer usage 3,700. So they're right here in this range. We did a rate survey just to see where Bloomington ends up in comparison to the other communities. We looked at the sample of communities that have population over 25,000 and collected as many of them as we can. Each community is represented by the dot here. Of the 33 communities that we sampled, approximately eight had outside city surcharges, and their range was from 14% surcharge for outside city customers up to 50% outside city customer surcharge. Bloomington, you can see we plotted you on the map. You're right there in the middle or so. We do have an actual rate survey that we passed along to you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious, in terms of numbers of inside city customers versus outside city customers, how does that compare in terms of actual numbers of customers?
That's information we certainly included in our analysis when we were reviewing consumption. I'd have to look at the detail and get a response to you on that.
Okay.
That's a good question. Who's the top dot and the bottom dot?
Top dot is Evansville at $79.80
Just for sewer.
just for sewer. And they have an outside city surcharge of 35%. And the bottom dot is Schererville, and they're at $20.51.
The region, man, they know how to do it.
The region.
Well, you got that, Lake Michigan.
That's right.
Yeah, I just want to check this again. I think I checked last time. If it weren't for the 12% additional for outside customers, if it were to be equalized, it would be about 4.5% across the board.
Yeah, we calculated as
4.5 to
5%,
5.
so yes, yeah. So the outside city customers, one of the adjustments that were made in our report was that the increase due to the surcharge would be about $465,000. That added to the 660 deficit, so your total deficit would have been $1.1 million if not you hadn't put the surcharge in, which calculates to a 5% rate increase across the board.
I know this is a kind of a follow-up question to what Jean said. I know you don't have the numbers, but who is considered the outside the city? I mean, is that?
Yeah, I mean, so you mean like within the corporate
Within the-
boundaries of the
right,
city of Bloomington,
it's-
that's what we're calling outside, would be anyone outside
Outside
the city
Bloomington.
proper?
Correct, that do not pay for Bloomington property taxes, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
And how does that apply to the little unincorporated islands within the city? Because they're not technically paying city property taxes and such, correct?
Right, so they're lumped in with the entire, so when we talk about outside city, it's hard to say this particular area would pay this, even though they're inside the corporate boundaries. We created a class of customers, of the outside city customers, and that's how the rates were developed.
Okay. Yeah, I've been seeing people asking, well, what if I live just outside the city limits versus 5 miles outside the city limits? Shouldn't I be charged a smaller surcharge? But we're really talking about, the expense of maintaining the pipes that are outside of the city limits, whether you're just over the boundary or beyond.
Correct.
Yeah. Or in one of those little islands.
Correct.
So a question on the financing piece. So was part of the analysis to consider whether or not we should use available cash to pay down existing bonds and then finance new bonds all up front? Or is the analysis that we're better off using some of the cash available for the new improvements now and then financing that difference? Am I asking that in a way that makes sense?
Yes, so
Okay.
we did the latter there. We didn't use any of the current cash proceeds to buy down. A lot of your bonds already have very low interest rates, and some of them are not available for call at this point in time. I believe the next resolution talks about calling some of your SRF loans. They're at the time of call. Generally, those bonds can't be called. Have a 10-year call if it's a 20-year bond. So a lot of those bonds, I think you are refunding all the bonds that you possibly can in the next resolution. We did not take into consideration any of the rate change having to do with that, those changes, since those are not a fixed item that we could do at this point in time.
Okay, and then, I understand you don't have the answer to this question, because if you did, you wouldn't have to work. But the question is, I know you used 3.24 in your analysis for a bond rate, but what are you seeing now in the bond market, and how does our timing and all of that impact our decision and could potentially impact that bond rate?
Yeah, so we did include a factor of increasing, we used the current rates as of last month, and we added 1 basis point on what that yield would be. So yeah, interest rates right now are historically low, and they have been low for a number of years, but they are very low right now. So since we proposed a 2020 bond issue, we had to include some possible increase in that. Yes, if I could.
No, I understand.
I couldn't, yeah.
But theoretically, I mean,
Theoretically.
with it being a 2020, I mean, it could be as much as 100 basis points
Right,
more,
right.
right?
And
I
that's-
mean,
that's what
and
we
that would
included.
change all of our math here quite a bit.
Correct, correct. But what we've done is that we're using averages and amounts so that,
Sure,
yes,
yeah.
things can change by a slight amount and not affect the end result.
Right, okay.
Also, our report, it does recommend bonding sooner rather than later. There
yeah.
is that 10.4 million of cash that we recommended to push down the line just in the event there are changes in the market. So it was one thing that we had considered. And 100 basis points was the cushion that we had built
Okay.
into those
Well,
rates.
and to that point, so is the recommendation then to hold the 10.4 million in cash and bond the whole thing? Is that,
Yeah, so that's what we showed on the capital
Yeah,
improvement plan,
okay.
is actually bonding in 2020 to pay for the big projects in 2020 and 2021. Then the cash would be used for the big projects in 2022 and 2023, and then 2024 afterwards is the next bond issue of any of those big projects.
at which point we retire a bunch, right?
Yes, you
Right.
retire some bonds and have some additional bonding capacity built in.
What, again, this may not be I don't know that there's a standard answer, but for a utility this size, how much cash available should we have?
Well, your bond ordinance states a minimum that you should have 2 months' worth of operation and maintenance, and you have met that. And so that's what the 10.3 represents, is the excess over that 2 months' worth of operation and maintenance expenses. So,
So we're 10.3 in excess, 10.4
in
in
excess
excess.
of, yes. And it's been built up over years.
I understand.
Anticipated these projects, yes.
But I mean, and the reason I ask that is because as a theoretical question, I mean, we're not in the business of making money. I mean, so
Correct.
there's this question of, how much is a comfortable cushion and then how much is too much when we should be looking at how does that impact rates, projects, and so forth.
So
When
when-
something like this comes along, it's nice to have the cash too.
Correct, so the amount that you're gonna be holding is about $900,000 in your operation and maintenance fund, and that is built into your bond ordinances that you promise to the bondholders that you're going to hold at least $900,000 of money in that operation and maintenance fund to fund 2 months' worth of operation and maintenance expenses.
Let me jump in here. We haven't, the reason that we have the cash is there were a lot of projects that we had planned in the 2016 rate case that were set back in time as we started working on this capacity expansion requirement. So what we did was, we had projects we had intended to do in the last couple of years that we've put off as integrated into this larger plan.
Yeah, we're not banking surpluses.
We're not banking surpluses,
Sure.
we're banking capital dollars that we intended to spend on the very projects we're doing, but those projects have been reconfigured because of the sewer ban warning letter from the state.
Sure, no, makes perfect sense. Yeah, thank you.
And I just want to clarify, when you're talking the 10.3 million for the utility, this is just the sewer utility. This is not the combined, all 3 sections of the utility.
That is correct, we only looked at the sewage works. It's
Okay.
actually, its rates and everything that's set with the sewage work only support the sewer bonds. Water is its own.
Right.
Stormwater actually is a department, but we were only looking at the sewage works portion when we were looking at the rates and charges.
Okay, thanks.
I have just another slide or two, if I could do those, and then we can do the open question. Would that be okay?
You're the boss, go ahead.
Jim, go ahead, ask your question.
Are you sure?
I am
Oh, sorry, Jim, I didn't see the
Yes.
question.
I was just trying to get to the end here.
I don't understand. Thank you, Madam President. First thing I want to make clear for folks listening, and it is true that the council wants these to be more frequent and more predictable rate increases. That's what we've had. And it was stated that, and correct me if I'm wrong, waterworks is every 4 years, presidential elections. Sewer works every 4 years, municipal elections. So did I get that correct? Midterm
Yeah, we're
elections.
intending to do the midterm years, but we were delayed last year and weren't able to finish the analysis.
So in essence, so it's clear to everyone out there, we're really talking every 2 years.
Yeah, we're doing one or the other every 2 years, yes.
Okay, and I want that clear to folks listening, because if you say forward, and you know, that could get a little confusing. And again, since we're talking hypotheticals, inside and outside, and of the outside folks that have been identified are customers, let's say for, just hypothetically, 50% of those are brought inside. Now, whether they're in or out changed, but the cost of those services did not change. So how would that be mitigated? Understanding this is just hypothetical. So would we expect further legislation to adjust that?
I mean, if they were annexed, is that the question?
If they were brought in? I never
Okay.
said annexed.
I just want to make sure I understand the
I
question.
never said
Okay,
if they're brought in.
all right.
What happened in
Annex
that,
is one of those methods, yes.
what would happen in that case is that you would redo the whole analysis, but change the map of who was in and who was out. So you wouldn't automatically switch from the outside rate to the inside rate, because we'd have to
Correct.
recalculate both rates.
I said reconfigured, which
That's right,
would
we'd
require
reconfigure.
new or updated legislation potentially.
That's right,
Okay.
and presumably that would happen concurrently with the sewer works rate analysis in the future.
Okay, thank you.
And can I ask one? I'll wait till you're done. Do
I
your
just have
slides.
one more slide.
Okay, go for it.
I just wanted to get to the punchline here, is that staff is recommending the overall 5% increase in annual revenue for the sewer works, structured as a 3% increase for customers lying within the city limits and 15% for those customers lying outside the city limits. And the 12% reflects the difference in the cost of providing service to the two customer classes. I just wanted to formally say that this is what staff is recommending. Thank you.
Well, and the whole reason for doing this is that the city customers are not subsidizing the lifestyle and the usage of people who are in a more rural area.
Yeah,
More
that's
dense.
true. In effect, what's been happening is, since it costs more to provide the service outside city limits than it costs to provide the service inside city limits, effectively the customers inside city limits have been subsidizing the cost of providing that service to the outside customers. And the purpose of the establishing the customer classes is to have the customers pay what it costs to provide the service that they get.
And it's called the cost of service study. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I'm
So
sorry.
my question kind of is related to that. So it was stated earlier that the reason it costs more to provide the service to outside the city limits is that the average density per foot of pipe is less. And so you've got fewer people. You still have to maintain that pipe, just like you have to maintain the pipes that are inside the city limits. But you've got fewer people per length of pipe that are funding that maintenance, right? And
That's
so
right.
the cost per customer on there, divided across all those customers, is gonna be higher because
That-
there are fewer customers per length of pipe. And so when the comment was made, what happens when some of those outside customers become inside customers through whatever route that happens, their density per pipe doesn't necessarily increase. And so that would lead the question, well, how come we're saying it now doesn't cost as much? But, so I want to clarify my thinking about this. Even within the city right now, city customers, There are some parts of the city that are more dense than other parts. And so the cost per city customer is more of an average across all those city pipes, right?
That's right.
Less dense parts of the city, but we have to have some demarcation in terms of customer classes. And so we're talking average. And so those outside customers that might be brought into the city and now be considered inside the city customers, their density may be a little less than other parts of the city. It might not change immediately by being in the city, but it adds into the average cost for inside the city customers, right?
That's right.
Okay, all right, because
But
I
it's
could
divided-
anticipate that being
it's-
an argument.
But it's divided against a much larger population.
Right,
So
exactly.
that little adjustment is allocated across a larger customer base.
Exactly, okay, thank you. My thinking is clear about that now.
And we also have to remember, right, that there's a lot of outer area residents that are getting water service but not getting sewer service.
That's right. Because they're on septic, and we accounted for that when they.
So this is only counting the existing sewer customers in out of area.
That's right.
Okay.
And it's actually interesting, the way this works out, because how the rates would change after some future date when some of these outside customers became inside customers, should that happen, the way the rates get refigured actually depends on what got brought into the city and what didn't. So, because if you bring a higher density portion in, it has a larger effect on the outside people, a negative effect on the outside people. Whereas if you brought in the less dense portion from the outside, it would have the opposite effect. So, so it's actually more complicated than just the inside and just the outside. The reason that the customer classes are divided the way they are, you could argue that central city, high density areas should be considered even more dense than, say, my neighborhood on the east side or something like that. The difference between the inside customers, inside city and outside city customers, is there's actually legislation that supports the establishment of those two customer classes. So lacking legislation, chopping it up inside the city would be much more, is not something we would be able to do.
So Vic, is it correct then? I mean, if everybody from outside the city limits were to come into the city, I think that last slide that said overall, we're talking about a 5% increase, right?
That's right.
Okay, so that's kind of what the impact would be, if you can think about it that way.
Further question? All right, so are we at the point where I get to ask if there's a motion to approve? And which of these two resolutions, one at a time?
Well, you haven't even gotten to the second resolution, so yes, one of the.
Oh dear, all right, I thought they were all,
We're dealing with 2019-9.
all right, so do we do that one first and then move on?
Yeah.
All right, I would entertain a motion for approval for resolution 2019-9.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. So who's up to talk about 2019-10? Miss Laura.
I don't have a PowerPoint, but we do have handouts if anybody needs one.
I'll take one.
Yep.
Oh, do you need one, Jim?
Yes.
Thank you.
I've got one.
Okay.
Do you need one? Here.
That's right.
Here, you got one?
That one.
Do you need one?
I have a cheat sheet that I wrote about.
Okay, if you need one, you can use mine, and I'll look off of Jason.
We went over, hi, my name's Laura Petta. I'm the Assistant Director for Finance for City of Bloomington Utilities. We had a subcommittee meeting last week to talk about 3 separate SRF bond issues that are eligible for refunding. Those are the 2004, 2006B, and 2006C bond series in the sewage works. And they would be replaced by a 2019 refunding bond. The underwriter has promised issuing premium bonds which would help to buy down the outstanding bond principal by $600,000. Currently, there is about $589,000 of additional cash in the debt service reserve fund. And that's over and above the current debt service reserve fund level requirement. And that money would also buy down the current bond principal that's outstanding. While the current bond coupon rates range between 3.33% and 3.44%, the all-in true interest cost of the proposed bonds would be would amount to approximately 2.006%. Annual debt service payments after consolidating the 3 outstanding bonds into a single bond issue will amount to approximately $128,000 a year. And gross savings after deducting the debt service reserve funds to be applied amount to about $450,000 with a net present value of over $386,541. The proposed bonds will reach final maturity on 1/1/2027. That is the same as the current 3 outstanding bonds to be refunded. And then the net present value savings amount to 5.03% of the refunded bonds and 5.76% of the refunding bonds. So we are looking at consolidating these 3 bonds and saving about $128,000 a year in our debt service payments. It's not a ginormous amount of money for the utility, but it does look to be about $386,000 in total. Did you have questions?
Anybody?
Does that include all our expenses too?
It does,
Okay.
yes.
Good, I mean, hey.
Every little bit
Sounds like
helps.
a no-brainer.
Yes, and this is not factored into the cost of service study and rate case, so it would be a little bit of a cushion for the sewer
And
utility.
these are the only bonds that are getting refunded are the ones that can, right?
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions? All right.
Thank
I
you.
would entertain a motion for the approval of Resolution 2019-10.
So move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. All righty, where are we? Staff reports.
No,
I only have one major thing in terms of staff, well, 2 things. The first one is now that all the budget season items are completed by the board, the rate analysis that we just presented, the bond refunding that was just approved, and the previous item regarding the possibilities for waivers for sewer connection fees in certain circumstances. All those items will go to the council for first reading tomorrow. Second reading and the public hearing will be on the 11th, and then the council's final action is scheduled for the 18th, assuming we get that far, Jim.
Yeah, so
The other item is that recently the board approved a contract for doing mold testing in our plants. I wanted to follow up with you all about that since there was some concern during that item. The results are back, and they turned out very well. There were no elevated levels of mold detected in any of the facilities. The inside spore counts were around 3 to 5% of the outside count on average, which is well within the healthy range. Usually anything around 20% or less is normal, so this is far below it. There is evidence of water damage on ceiling tiles in the main building and in the maintenance building, but it doesn't appear to have caused any kind of a mold problem yet. We are in the process of replacing those roofs, as you know. So, once those roofs are replaced, we will replace the ceiling tiles.
Great.
So I can get you a copy of the actual reports if you'd like, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that the mold testing did come out well and that we don't have a mold problem in any of our plants.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vic. All right, if that's it for staff reports, are there petitions and communications from anyone? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion for approval. Not approval. What do you call that?
We approve
Adjournment. We are adjourned.